Hello, Advanced Motion Design. In the previous class, we talked a little bit about Aero and how we could use it to create immersive design. In our final project, we're going to be creating a custom immersive reality experience, which sounds really fancy, but essentially I want you to import either layered Photoshop or Illustrator files, single PNG, JPEG, or even PNG sequences, which I'm going to talk about today, or 3D objects like OBJ files, and create these 3D scenes that, when exported, people can view in the Aero app as augmented reality and place them in a real-world setting. In the Week 14 folder, like I pointed out last week, there's the Starry Night PSD that has all the layers needed to import and separate along the Z to experiment with, like in this example. You can also scan it and try it for yourself with the Aero app and place it. And there's just some tips online as well. But essentially, I had imported that PSD into Aero and then was able to separate it along this layer spacing. So that was playing with the 2.5D, which is something that we visited throughout the semester. We also were able to add true 3D objects just using these starter assets within Aero. So we just used some basic spheres here and obviously scaled these down quite a bit. The scene palette up here is basically like a layer palette. We can select our objects and then have our properties down below, like sizing, position, rotation. We can also select the object. We have some really basic tools over here. When we select an object, we have that three-handled axes like we do in most 3D environments, where we can move it in 3D space if you'd rather be more manual than numeric. We can also rotate using these handles, and we can scale using the little cube icon. There's also shortcuts for all three of those with move, rotate, and scale. So R for rotate, S for scale, but really, if you just choose V, that's kind of the multi-tool, and then you've got those different parts of that to do all those different properties. The most useful tools, in my opinion, though, are just 1, 2, and 3. Those are your camera tools, which are also listed along the left-hand side here. 1 is orbit, 2 is just move, and 3 is like your dolly. You can zoom in here. There's not a drop down in Aero of like left, right, top. You're kind of on your own to look around here. But using 1, 2, and 3 makes it a lot simpler. And as always, you've got to select to effect. So if I click V, I can go quickly back to just my selection tool. And maybe I want this to be a moon or something up here. Or I can also hide it by clicking on the little eyeball. I think I've done something similar since I see something I named sun that's already hidden. This one, I believe I imported actually from this space exploration pack down below. So there's quite a few starter assets that you can import if you don't have a Cinema 4D object that you want to bring in, or something from Adobe stock. Some of these have built-in animation, as the name would imply, and we're going to get into triggering that in just a moment. If there's not built-in animation, there's some really simple stuff that you can do, like spinning or animating along the X, Y, or Z axes. Nothing with keyframes, just really basic stuff. And I just want to get rid of some of these unnecessary objects here, so I'm just going to delete the sun and this extra sphere that I've added. Now, I'm going to collapse some of these for now. And under the space under the space exploration pack, I had added this satellite in the previous class and just kind of moved this off to the side. And I just found it amusing to have Van Gogh's Starry Night with this realistic space equipment kind of hanging out in it. By the way, if I wanted to change my original artwork at all, I would just go back to that PSD, which, spoiler alert, I have a different asset here that we're going to work with in just a moment. But I would go to my layered PSD here, make a change, edit, save, and if I needed to swap something out, there is a replace selected asset icon. So if I needed to change a layer here, I would just select that and then click replace selected asset. So for example, I don't really like how the tree here kind of cuts off at the top. It looks like a bad pruning job. So in Photoshop, if I go to that layer, I had already gone in, like I mentioned in the previous class, and separated things into different layers using content-aware deletion to kind of fill in any gaps. I'm going to option click on the tree layer to just solo that layer. And I'm going to go in with my eraser tool. I'm just going to click E for eraser. And I'm just going to do a little pruning here. My computer is lagging a little bit, so it's a slight delay. This isn't quite as elegant as I was hoping for. I want a little bit of a softer edge here, so I'm just going to bring the hardness down a little bit. That was too much. It also helps to zoom in a little bit. But I don't want this to just end off the edge of the screen. I want there to be something a little more subtle than that. And so I would save this, and depending on where this is located, if this is saved on my computer and the file that the Aero one is located on is on the cloud, it might not update directly. This one doesn't look like it is. So in that case, I would want to go and replace this by going select file. So it does depend on where it's located, but it's not difficult to swap out and replace something and you don't lose everything else. So you swap it out. And you can see all the same properties are in place. The Z layer spacing is still there. Everything else, position-wise, is still there. I don't need to make any other adjustments. But now I have that updated erasing at the top of my tree. So if I needed to do some adjustment with my content-aware deletion, or if there was some masking that I needed to change, or if I wanted to delete some of these bits here, I'd be able to update that and not have to start all over again. So it is nice that you can replace things pretty easily within the actions here. Of course, you can revert to the original as well. It's non-destructive because it's pulling from that original file. And also a similar feature to Dimension, which is another newer Adobe tool we had talked about recently, is that you can align the selection to the ground. You can make it match to the ground. And this is helpful that when you export your file and place it to a plane, when somebody scans a surface with their phone, they can, basically it's going to scan that horizontal or vertical surface depending on what you choose for it to look for, and then it's going to align itself to that plane. And so matching it to that ground plane is just a good way of assuring that's what it's going to be synced up with. So I have my 2.5D layers here. Let's bring those, I actually want to spread those out a little bit more. I see when I spin around here that I have a stray sphere. I'm going to click B to switch to my move tool and pull that one forward. And I'm going to click to go back to my orbit tool and go back to my satellite. Let's pull that up a little bit. And I think that's looking pretty good. Now, it's always select to effect, so if I want to modify something, I would just click on it and change it either using its handles or the properties down below. With these spheres, once I got them to the size I wanted, I just clicked on this duplicate selection button, and then I changed the scale a little bit. So it basically copies it and pastes it right in place. And I could line that up with the painting. I'm just going to move that a little bit over and maybe not scale it up quite that much, but I can make a few of those if I wanted to add a little bit more here. Let's make one more larger star. And then this one will pull forward some more along the sea. So if I click 1 to move my dolly tool around here, then when somebody's viewing this and looking at it from all sides, they'll really get a sense of this positioning. So with Aero, you can create kind of a static, immersive design that someone can place themselves into. You do want to be mindful of the overall scale. Right now, this isn't huge. This is only 20 centimeters. Right now, this is only 20 centimeters wide, so I might want to select all and make that a little bit bigger. Let me just pull back a little bit more. So when you're designing it on your phone, one advantage is that as you're placing it, you get an idea of its scale in real space. You don't really get that sense here. I'm not really good with numbers and getting an idea of size, especially with centimeters, which of course you could type in IN as well. There's not too many preferences in Aero just yet. There's literally just the English choice that you want. At the top of the screen, there's Edit and then Preview. Preview really just gives you look without all of the panels. And when we add animation, this is where we'll be able to view that. But it doesn't really show us it in that space and give us an idea of scale. So that is a big advantage of developing this using the mobile tools, using the phone or the tablet. I'm going to go back to Edit here and just deselect. Right now I've got this big diamond bounding box because I've got everything selected. And I have some elements that I created, or rather modified, in Photoshop. I have some starter assets that I used, just these basic abstract shapes. And then I have some more advanced ones that I have from the Space Exploration Pack. I want to add something that has a little bit more to it, and I added this astronaut who, before I scale him, he actually looks kind of terrifying, like some kind of kaiju or something like that. I didn't really actually want to change the scale. In fact, I kind of want to scale him up and just leave him just like that. But we can change the scale of him and, of course, change the position and rotation. I had already kind of been playing around with this asset, so I had one placed up here and one kind of further away. I just like the idea of an astronaut kind of floating above starry night because it's seen as such this tranquil scene. And I like the idea of really any one of these additions, one of just these kind of three-dimensional elements being added to it, whether it's the depth of the layers or the abstract stars, whether it's just the satellite. But I'm especially fond of the idea of just this astronaut just kind of floating above everything. So I'm adding like a little bit more and more each time and really just experimenting here. But the only thing I had imported that's outside of Aero is the Starry Night file, which is available in the week 14 folder. So I have my astronaut here, and of course can change the scale, position, rotation using my properties or using my selection tools. And if I wanted it to just be static like this and share it, there would really be no problem with that. Maybe I have a poster that I want to make three-dimensional, or an ad like I had with the previous design. If I click on my home button here, it shows you previous projects, and we had that project we had created in Dimension, which was totally static, but gave us the ability of creating almost like a product mock-up that we can place in a space in real time. So that would be an example of something we can do that doesn't involve any animation. And I'm going to be coming back to this stage example and just a review of how to build something that's made of multiple assets rather than just this layered file that we're importing plus adding 3D things to. But if we want to add some movement to this, one of the main things I wanted to focus on today is adding triggers and actions to get a little bit more just interactivity to our Aero projects. And so we have our starter assets over here, and in the lower left-hand corner of the interface, there's this little bin that says content. That's actually what controls the starter assets panel. So if you click that, that will hide that area if you want more real estate there. Right below that is a little running person, and that says Behavior Builder if you hover your cursor over it. That's going to open up this large area down below, and this is actually where we can add our behaviors. So if I wanted our person here to wave when somebody views this experience, we can do that. Now that just happens to be because this astronaut has a wave animation, but I want to show you how you can access that and then how you can also get to just really basic animation that really any one of these abstract shapes or primitive objects can have. So the animation within Aero is pretty limited. There's really not any keyframes. You really are just adding these behaviors. So as an example, I've got my astronaut selected, and when you don't have any triggers or anything added yet, you have just this blue plus sign that says trigger. Add triggers and actions to make your scene interactive. So it can be totally static, and in that case, you'd still be able to share it by clicking on this upper right-hand button and clicking Create Link. You can give it a name like Space Scene or Starry Astronaut, and that was the least creative name I've come up with in some time. And if I click Create Link, that's the thing that gives you that QR code you can download that file, and then this ping is what you can share with people, and then when they scan that, that's how they're going to be able to place this AR file using the Aero app. So they would just have to scan this with their phone would identify it as an AR experience, and then they'd be able to place it. Also, when you click share, you also can create a link as well. So this Aero app link is also something that you'd be able to put out there. So whatever state your file is at, you've got preview to get an idea of it within the app itself, especially when you have animations to test. Otherwise, you can click share here, and sometimes this is good just if you are on a desktop app to get an idea of what it looks like on the phone in a real space. So that share button is helpful really at any time during development. All right, so with my astronaut selected, I'm going to click on the plus trigger button. And there's 3 ways that you can trigger an action. There's start, tap, and enter proximity. Start really just means that the scene loads. So you can add a delay, but essentially it just means that they have placed and started the Aero scene. Tap requires the person to actually click on the subject. And then enter proximity would be them actually getting close to the object. So these so far are the only 3 triggers that we have within Aero. For this one, I actually want it to be a start. I want him to wave right when this scene starts. So I'm going to click start. And then once you choose your trigger, then you're able to choose your action. And depending on what kind of asset you have, that's going to give you different types of actions. For example, some of these directable characters, these are very new to Aero. These have a lot of different things that they can do animation-wise. They're fully 3D characters. They don't have as many basic controls, like making them move across the screen, but that's because you might not care as much since you can make them point or laugh and do other commands. So there's kind of a give and take with this. So I have this on the start of the scene, and if I click plus where it says action, I can choose what I want this character to do. So this particular character has built-in animations, so I could choose play animation. Play images might sound like a slideshow, and it could be used for that, but it's actually going to be the main way that you play any kind of 2D animation. You can't have an MOV play in Aero. You might see that there's no play movie command. So if you created a motion design sequence in After Effects and you wanted to trigger that in Aero, you would actually need to export your animation from After Effects as a ping sequence and then bring that into Aero as a zipped file and then have that play images, whether it's start or tap or enter proximity. The play images is actually really important within Aero as an action. You can also have it play audio. If you looked at this file I brought up earlier, it's using that stage. There's a little secret in the back, but I used a starter asset and have it trigger an animation and also play an audio file. But I have a few actions kind of strung together that I'll bring up in just a little bit here. I'm bringing it up now, but I'll show you how I did it later. But a few other actions here. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory. You can make an object spin. You can make it bounce. These are all going to have different parameters. Aim just means what is something facing. So you can have an object always follow the person. or the camera. You can have an object show or hide. So you can have somebody tap on something and it disappears, or they get close to it and it appears. You can have something move. So that's going to be the closest thing to basic animation you have here, is if you want something to move across the screen. You can move or move to. You can have the scale of something animate. You can have something rotate. Orbit is more of like a 3D animation. You can have it go around something in a scene. You can have it follow. You can have it wait. Or you can have it open a URL. So if you are using this as kind of a marketing tool, you can have them click on something and it would go to a link. So for this astronaut, since he is an already animated character, I'm going to choose play animation. And then to the far right over here, it's still giving me options of if I wanted to switch to a different action, I could. The action list always has a play button to the right, so it's going to show me a preview of that thing without having to go into the preview mode, which will let me view everything. And it also lets me just confirm what my subject is, what the animation set is, and then what the clip is. So this is something that would obviously have to be animated and rendered in advance. So this is a fully animated 3D character that has these animation sets. So this was done outside of this program in something like Maya. So I want him to do, or her, a little wave. And with this animation, I could choose how long it is, what the speed of it is, if there's a transition. This one, I could choose if it's going to override existing animation, like something I add. I could choose whether or not it returns to start position. This particular one has a lot of parameters because there's a built-in animation. But we can test this by just clicking on the little play once button. And then you can see it's triggering that animation. And it seems a little bit slow, so I can speed it up and test it again. And that seems a little bit better. And so I could choose how many times it happens. I could have it go back and forth. And basically a lot of it is just trial and error, which is, I said before recording today, that Aero reminds me a lot of web development, which once upon a time was my specialty, at least with animating with Flash. When you're developing for the web, the size of the files is really important just because you want them to be able to get through to people. And so this is where being able to choose between 2.5D or 3D or somewhere in between is going to become really important. And how can you mix the two or just kind of take advantage of different things? Like we could have an animation that goes on for a long time, or can it be a shorter animation that loops? So with my astronaut, if I wanted to just test that, I can click on the action and click on the play once button. If I had other things in the scene I wanted to observe, I can click on preview. And because this is set to just start, that would automatically happen. Let's add some more animation, but let's add something that requires interactivity. So I'm going to click on the satellite. And I'm going to click on the plus trigger button. And this one I want to add a tap to. So I'm going to add a tap. And for the action of this one doesn't have any wave animation or do a dance. This one just has these basic things that are kind of subject to any primitive shape within Aero. So I don't necessarily want it to just spin. I think I'll actually add that to the astronaut in a moment. I like the idea of him kind of spinning uncontrollably while waving and being friendly about it. I actually want the satellite to orbit, which is just going to be spinning but in a 3D space around something. So before I do that, let me just show you move, which is an even more basic command. If I do something like move, it just again asks me to confirm the action. It asks me to confirm the action, the subject, and then where am I moving it to? Is the offset along the X? Is it along the Y or the Z? It is a little frustrating here because it won't show you the movement here. You have to preview it. So there was X offset there. I can play with it here, but I have to preview it to actually see what it's doing. And with easing, it's easing in and then out. I can also choose to just have it be linear. I could choose to have it be a bounce. There's not going to be any kind of motion graph here, like with After Effects, sadly. And right now I'm just previewing the movement of this one satellite. But if I go to my preview mode, I'm seeing the start animation, because that's what the astronaut is set to. And then the satellite is set to tap. So if I click on that, that's what's going to execute that animation. And that's a little chuggy, to use a technical term, so I might want to speed that up there. And maybe just do linear rather than easing. Well, let's just play that back. And maybe we get faster, but like I said, it would just be a matter of continuing to test things. Now, you can continue to test things, but you can also continue to add more and more action. So I might want the satellite to move back and forth, but then maybe I want it to inexplicably bounce off the ground as well. I ultimately want to make this orbit, but just as an example of stringing multiple actions together, I'm going to add a bounce after this. So you can see you can have a plus sign after it. And bounce is basically what it sounds like. It's just going to slam this off of the ground plane. You can choose how many times. It will do a nice kind of rebound as many times as you tell it to. And you can choose the easing. So you could choose which direction as well. Mine is along the Y plane right now. So if I choose the X, I can get it to move that way instead. But you just get this nice movement. There we go. But now it will string together the move and the bounce sequentially. So if I go back to preview, this is still happening at once. And if I click tap, it's going to do its first thing. And I definitely want to speed that up. But then once it does that, it will come back and do its bounce. And it got impatient. So now I actually want to do more than one thing at once. So if I want to delete something, I can click on something to highlight it. And you can see that when I have just bounce highlighted, it just gives me those options. I'm going to click on that and just hit delete. I'm going to go to just the first thing and actually change this to orbit instead. And with orbit, you choose what you're orbiting. I'm going to choose Starry Night as a starting point, which is the overall image. And so let's see, with the satellite selected and orbit, edit. It's almost like choosing your origin point though, where you can use something just to control another object. It doesn't have to be something that's actually in the scene, which is pretty helpful. But now if we choose orbit, now we have this satellite that kind of goes around the scene. And I might want to move him a little bit further out. I don't know why I gave the satellite a gender, but I did. And maybe I don't want it to go back and forth, but this is just one example. So you can string animations together sequentially by just going kind of horizontally here, or you can work concurrently if you work You can also work concurrently if you work vertically, which was far more difficult to say than I thought it would be. So if I wanted my astronaut to wave but also spin at the same time, rather than wave and then spin, which we can look at the difference of, I suppose. So right now, if we look at preview, let's actually turn off the satellite and just see what our astronaut does. Right now our astronaut just waves. It's a little shy. So if we, and that's on the start. So when the scene starts, he waves, and if we want to, afterwards we can just have him spin. We can choose the axes, reverse the direction, choose the duration. We look at that right there. That looks fine. Let's do back and forth. And so right now if we preview, it's going to be sequentially where he's going to wave and then afterwards he's going to spin. And the only reason he didn't spin multiple times is because there wasn't a long enough duration. Let's do like count 2 and then raise that a little bit. So we could do it that way, or we can do it at the same time. So it really just matters what you are looking for in your scene. So you can have a string of actions, or if we just want to remove this one thing, we can highlight that and hit delete. And then if we click the plus sign below that other action, I'm going to choose spin here. And this one I'll have go a few times. And now if we click preview, you can see he's waving and spinning, which just gives you a different kind of experience. And I have him perpetually spinning, so that's a little bit different. All right, so there's just one example of animation. And if you don't have an idea yet for your final, I definitely would start sketching things out. There's no shortage of examples out there. I've posted some things in the week 14 folder and in the discussion board. I also shared some resources to actually recreate the stage that we did in the first few weeks of class. Creating that 2.5D stage. And I thought this was kind of just a fun callback, and that's actually what that code was that I showed earlier if you didn't scan it. Now, I'm going to be uploading the singular images that you can use to import and place the floor, the front curtain, and the side curtain. You don't have to have something that's multiple layers, like Starry Night or this scene, which is how I started this one. So you can bring in a layered Illustrator or Photoshop file and then separate them using the layer spacing along X, Y, or Z. The only problem with that is that you can't go in and individually modify those layers. So I couldn't go and rotate the floor layer to be flat. So to do that, I had to import the floor just as a ping and then rotate that along the X. And then I had to import the curtains individually and create this little room. And so this is interesting because instead of just having kind of an open, airy, starry night scene, which is really cool on itself, you can also create kind of a room in a way. So I mentioned this was really more just kind of a callback. I did add a little secret back here using one of the starter assets. So if you go to animation, there is a little dinosaur in there. And that little dinosaur does have an animation of roaring. And so I added a tap trigger with an animation of his roar. But then I added a concurrent animation of play audio, and then found an MP3 of a rooster crowing. So that was a good example of two things playing at the same time, because I didn't want it to do its animation and then crow. I wanted those things to happen simultaneously. And I actually added a slight delay to the rooster sound just because of the animation. He kind of has like this build up first. So just an example of how you can work with multiple types of actions at one time. I also liked this example because you can place your dancers and whatnot in the front, but then you kind of have this little secret compartment in the back. So if you make this a really sizable Aero file, if you make this really big and somebody places it and can actually walk into it, which you could, they'd be able to peek around the corner here and see that there's a dinosaur there, which, you know, in my opinion is kind of awesome. And not only a dinosaur there, but a dinosaur that actually like crows like a rooster when you click on it. So if you're not using technology to do that, then what are you really using it for? So even though this file was originally created using a layered PSD file, and you still of course have access to that, I did export each layer as a separate ping, and I'm going to put that in the week 14 folder as well if you want to import each of those pieces as a ping. And then in Aero you would just rotate those accordingly. So you could just import them and rotate them along the axes that you would need to create ceilings, floors, walls, whatever you need, because you can't get to individual layers when you bring in a PSD. You can only separate the spacing of those layers, which is cool, but not what I wanted to do right here. So just another example and something I wanted to mention. Last thing I want to talk about today, also involving After Effects, is you can't bring in an MOV. And if you want to bring in an animation that you have done, you're going to need to export it as a ping sequence. For your various assets, you have your layered Photoshop or Illustrator files. You can import your Dimension 3D or 3D from After Effects. One thing I want to point out is that if you have animation from After Effects, you're going to need to export it as a ping sequence, just because you can't import an MOV or MP4 file into Aero. So if I wanted to bring this dancer back into her natural habitat, but in Aero, I would solo that layer. And of course we have transparency here. We're going to be exporting this as a ping sequence, and pings can support an alpha channel. So I have this really basic animation. I'm tempted to have her move right off the stage, but I want to keep this fast. And so I want to export this. And so I'm going to go Composition, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. You would want to make sure that you choose a ping sequence. I could either put this into the media encoder or just within the media renderer within After Effects. Either way, I want to render this as a ping sequence. And a ping sequence is essentially going to take every single frame of my animation and render it as an individual ping. I want to make sure that I am rendering the alpha channel with this. And that alpha channel is going to allow me to bring this in and basically recreate this file as it looks now, but within Aero. And so I want to export this sequence as a ping sequence. And I want to make sure I know where I'm saving this to. I'm going to save this to the desktop. I think it's best to create a folder for this and probably give this something involving a number just so that it will keep adding to said number. So I want to create a folder and then it's just going to populate that. And then I can render that sequence. And then you don't want to import just a bunch of random images within Aero. So after you export your ping sequence, whether you're doing it from the media encoder or whether you're doing it within the exporting options within After Effects itself, you just want to create a zipped file from that folder. And I want to compress that stage scene. And then as a zipped file, we can actually import directly into Aero. So with Aero open, I can actually go to my plus sign here to import, go to my desktop, and just bring it in as a singular asset. And it might take a second to load, but once you do, then I can just bring it in. And this one's a little bit funny just because in After Effects, it was a little bit cropped. And because there's not a traditional timeline, we can't kind of play it to make sure it plays properly. So if I bring this forward, you'll see the very first frame. And if the dancer had started off screen, you wouldn't actually see this at all. So I'm going to put this back behind the curtain a little bit. And then I want to immediately add a trigger to this. So I'm going to, with this selected, click on the plus trigger, click start, click plus action, and then I want it to play images. And so this is what you would do anytime you have one of these ping sequences. I want it to play this zip file, dancer test. I don't want it to trim it. I want it to play, I could choose the speed. Right now I can click play to get a sense for it, just play once. And you can see it has that really dorky little 2.5D spin in there, but I love that it translates that. But I can choose my frame rate and kind of test that. Speed it up a little bit. Could choose if it's infinite or back and forth. Maybe we want her to go back off stage. Otherwise we can click preview. So you could export a ping sequence using After Effects. However, to get this kind of animation, if it's something simple like this, I would definitely recommend a ping sequence when you don't have a choice, like a logo animation. But for something like this, just to experiment, I would also just play with the triggers and actions kind of built into Aero. For something like this, if I was to import just that dancer's ping, that dancer is dancer 3 from this file. So pings, JPEGs, any static file we can import without any problem. So dancer 3 is what I'm looking for here. And right now she is kaiju size, so I'm going to want to scale her down quite a bit. And I'm going to click B to grab that tool and bring her forward. Click S to scale her down a little bit. And right now she's just static. I'm going to click on the eyeball to hide the ping sequence dancer currently. I'm going to do something similar with this dancer and just move her off stage. And then let's recreate that animation basically. So with her selected, I'm going to click on plus trigger. And if we didn't see the triggers, we'd click on the little running person in the lower left icon for behavior builder. And I want to let's do a tap for this one just to try a different type of trigger. Though I also encourage you to do enter proximity. That's just not something I can demonstrate on my computer. And then so I'm going to do an action. And actually, even with this, start would really be the best one for this since we can't see them initially, but bear with me. We can also change this at any time by clicking to this drop-down menu when that is highlighted. So I'm going to do a move, and I want her to just move a little bit across the screen. And let's see about how far that is. Not far enough. If he doesn't get as far as we think they should, distance-wise, that's when we want to check the duration. So it just seems like it's a little slow. And I do think eventually Aero will have keyframes. I do see that coming. It's just currently we're kind of bound by this trial and error animation. So I want them to get a little bit faster into the center of the stage here, right about there. Here we go. And then similar to our dancer from After Effects that we created a ping sequence from, rather than having a concurrent movement, I actually want them to be a sequential movement, and here I want there to be that spin. So let's do a spin here along the Y and try that. And we don't really care about what it looks like there. We want to see the whole thing. So let's click preview, but we want to make sure that we don't see that other dancer, and we don't see anything at first because we have to click. And we actually had to kind of look for her because she's behind the corner there. But now she's coming out and then doing a spin. So we are able to replicate something really similar to our frame-by-frame animation, albeit it's really simplistic, by using the triggers and actions within Aero. And so we could continue doing that by kind of branching off of these triggers and actions, maybe adding more movements. We could do more Ys, could maybe add like a little hop in here. We could have some audio and just keep building from there. But I just wanted to give you an idea of how you can do some of these different triggers and actions. And of course, there's these directable characters as well that just real quick, if I want to add one of them, I didn't mean to add him, but here we are. Somebody like this, like Liam here, if you add a trigger to just start, let's just do play animation. I just want to show you some of the clips here. You can see these directable characters have tons of options. Entering scene, even tap reactions. So you can have a tap animation for them to react to. So you could have them do something when somebody taps them, which isn't creepy at all. Let's have him, let's see his dance. Oh wow. So we could put him on the stage if we want to. Why hide those skills? Maybe have him over to the side here. And then let's have our dancer, let's have that set to just a start rather than a tap so we don't have to look for her. And scale her up just a little bit. And then if we go to preview, we'll see those things both happen at the same time. Beautiful. So then we've got 2.5D and 3D happening all at once. So hopefully this gives you some ideas. And then of course, if we wanted to share this beautiful thing with others, we would go to the upper right hand corner. We can give it a title, create a link, generate a QR code, and even export it for other people to edit. If you want to share it with others, like a team, to edit, that's when you would create this .real file. But that's really, no pun intended, the only time you would need to create this file. Otherwise, this is the file you would use for editing. Otherwise, for sharing with others, for them to experience it, that would be creating this QR code or link, which is how I would expect you to turn it in on Blackboard. And so I'm really excited to see what you guys turn up and just kind of do with this. Aero's a really new program. I think it's a really exciting program. Adobe is really just getting started with VR. If you're not sure what you want to do yet, I would just start throwing abstract shapes in there, start adding animation and behaviors. That's kind of what I did with this creepy file, which of course I'm not going to be able to open because I mentioned it, but like that's just letters and the built-in trees. And one of the cool things about using the mobile app, of course, is that you can use it to record video and take pictures, so you can kind of move through a space. So if you wanted to get like a friend dancing with Liam or harassing that dinosaur backstage, you can do that. Just make sure that you save high enough resolution files while still keeping just the being mindful of optimization. So you have the Starry Night files and these starter assets, and now these stage files to play with if you'd like to. Those aren't required for you to turn in. I just wanted to give you some things to work with if you don't have an idea for your final project yet. But essentially, I just want you to get creative with Aero and create some immersive design. You don't have to use 3D, it can all be 2.5D. But I'm really curious to see what you create. And as always, please let me know if you have any questions, and have fun.